Well, there's been some shock results in the World Cup overnight, with European giants Germany and the Netherlands both knocked out in the earlier stage of the knockout phase. Now, for some countries, not getting through the group stages is akin to a national tragedy. And this appears to be the case for South Korea, whose coach has resigned, and the country's president is calling for an investigation into the team's failure. So for more on the fallout, I'm joined from Seoul by Paul Neat, managing editor at kleague.com English. Paul, good to have you with us today. I wanted to go through firstly on what the South Korean president had said that I found quite interesting. I mean, it says that it appears to be a failure of organization and personnel, and that when favoritism and cronyism take precedence over competence in selecting a commander, the result is as predictable as fire burning paper. It's quite the statement. What did he mean by that?
Yeah, he's got quite a way with words, hasn't he? But yeah, this is extraordinary, the fact that he's had to come out and say this. So any president to sort of comment after a football team has been knocked out of a World Cup. But the fact that he said he's utterly baffled is really interesting as well. But, you know, this was basically a culmination of mismanagement from 2 years ago that the government, before this president took office last year, it was when the coach was appointed in 2024, there was a culture ministry investigation, or sort of a probe into how that was all handled. So the fact that this is obviously coming to a head once again 2 years later, where it hasn't gone very well at the World Cup, it's really exasperated these issues that surfaced 2 years ago. But it's really extraordinary things that the president has said.
Yeah, so the coach, Hong Myung-bo, he has resigned and he has taken full responsibility for this. But do you believe he should be shouldering all or most of the blame?
Some, but yeah, I think what the issue is with this is not necessarily him. It's the fact that he was appointed again after he was in charge in 2014, and that was a disaster. They didn't even win a game in the 2014 World Cup. It's really all about how he was appointed, the governance of the Korean FA, and this growing distrust in football leadership in this country. So he is obviously the figurehead from a football side, and he will have borne the brunt of the fan backlash. But it's not just him who's feeling this pressure. The head of the KFA, who's also going to step down, by the way, he said this before the World Cup, that he would leave his position. He's been under a bit of pressure for a good few years, in fact. So it lies with the people above Hong, but his failure to get a good tune out of this squad. Now, Korea has never had this many players playing in Europe before in a World Cup squad. So the fact that they couldn't get out of the group stage with the likes of Kim Min-jae from Bayern Munich, Lee Gang-in from PSG, Hwang In-bom from Feyenoord, and of course Son, who was obviously with Spurs for 10 years until just last summer.
Yeah, of course, as you mentioned, these are all world-class players playing for top European clubs. But were there issues in the dressing room that perhaps were prompted, I suppose, or triggered by what's happening higher up in the Korean Football Federation?
I don't think so, but I think the hot mic incident just after the first game, where there was a journalist was overheard making comments about Son and his military service, the timing of that was really interesting, because it all seemed to unravel at that point. You know, there's been reports in the media this week that there was a bit of division in the camp between some players who were on board with the boycott of the media, others who weren't quite sure, and they reckon that this had caused a little bit of tension within the group. Now, there are some cynics who say that this is stuff that's been fed to the press by the KFA in the same way that they did after the Asian Cup, when they kind of leaked this fallout between Son and Lee Gang-in over table tennis, if you might recall, from 2 years ago. So there is some sort of cynicism there that this is just being put out there to try and make excuses. But there have definitely been reports this week about a potential rift, yeah.
Yes, of course, South Koreans love their football, so passionate. You can see, the colour in the stands in every competition, let alone the World Cup. How are they feeling at the moment, first about the team's performance, but also the fact that, the presidents now had to weigh in and ask for an investigation?
Well, I think it's really boiled over that it might seem a little bit hysterical from the outside looking in, but people were just so shocked at how bad this was. And actually, I think the whole thing can be summed up by a question that a journalist asked the coach straight after the loss to South Africa, where he asked, did the squad get food poisoning? Such was the lethargy in the performance. That kind of sums up the sort of sarcasm and cynicism, but underlying anger at just how poor this World Cup campaign was. People are obviously still very angry, but there's a little bit of hope now because Hong has resigned, and there's an Asian Cup coming up in January. So there is, it's kind of like they can hopefully put this World Cup behind them and start to look forward again, but they are still very, very angry, and you've even seen restaurant owners put signs on saying that the coach is banned from entering in convenience stores and stuff. It's all obviously symbolic, but it's a way for people to try and deal with this embarrassment of getting knocked out of a World Cup when they had quite an easy group, let's be fair.
Yes, it did look that way as well. And do you believe that there will be a thorough investigation, a fine-tooth comb to go through, what happened, at least in the context of the World Cup? And if there is an inquiry, what would it cover?
Yes, so they're going to look into how Hong was appointed and the steps that were taken to do so. There's talk of a National Assembly probe and even summoning KFA officials for a hearing at the National Assembly, basically Korea's parliament. They will look at the steps that were taken, but they already did the previous government did a probe 2 years ago, and it was found that they didn't take the correct process or approach in appointing a manager. There was no interviews done for Hong. So they will look at this, and then hopefully what they'll do is they'll try and create some kind of reform strategy or path to recovery based on what they find, because they've hit rock bottom now with this, and obviously sometimes when that happens, when you do hit rock bottom, there's only way from here is to sort of get better. So it might be a bit of a blessing in disguise in some senses, but it'll be uncomfortable, I think, for KFA officials and people who have to sort of sit in front of hearings and answer some uncomfortable questions.
Yeah, I mean, the Asian Cup isn't far away in that context, so we'll see what happens then. Paul Neate, really good to get your thoughts from Seoul. Thank you so much.
Thank you.